point of this session that is going to take about the next 20 minutes is to just explore some of the things that we might do around combating some of the common myths around renewable energy. So it's quite timely, really, because I picked up a copy of the Western Morning News on the station this morning, and I see it's the front page that the Conservatives are saying they're going to put a ban on onshore wind in their next manifesto. It seems to be something that they judge to be a politically popular move to say no more onshore wind turbines. So let's just, before I ask you to give me some of the common myths and misinformation around renewable energy, I just wanted to start off by setting a little bit of the context and say, yeah, it is highly politicised, isn't it? And it's got to a stage where actually there is an entrenched minority of people who are so implacably opposed to renewable energy and wind power in particular that it seems there's virtually nothing we can do to move them. And that's probably the case. We probably can't move them. They've sort of made up their minds that they're against it, and then they'll bend facts to fit that conclusion, whatever they can find, that comes afterwards. So we should perhaps not set our sights at converting everybody to be a fan of renewable energy and wind power, but to accept that there is an entrenched opposition. Does that mean, therefore, that we can afford to ignore it and go away, given that we're not going to change the view of that entrenched minority? Would it be a good idea just to ignore it and hope that it goes away? What do you think? Should we be combating it? And if so, how? It's a bit difficult to hold a conversation here, actually, with the background noise. I think our view in Friends of the Earth is that it would be very dangerous to leave the territory, to cede the territory, and allow it to be occupied completely by people who just oppose renewables for whatever reason. Because there's, in addition to that entrenched minority who aren't going to move, there's a huge middle ground. There's a lot of people who are responsible for making decisions, for forming opinions. They're on parish councils, they're on district councils, they're working in local media, and their voice counts as to what happens to the future of renewable energy. And if we just cede the ground entirely to the vocal opponents, those people will think that that is all the argument is. If they're not hearing the other side, if they're not hearing people standing up and saying, yeah, we want renewables, we want wind power projects, we want solar power projects in our area, then they will be scared to vote or to speak up for those projects themselves. So it's really important that we actually do make sure that the debate isn't one-sided and that we try to recover and combat some of the myths. Now, for the next little part of this session, I'm just going to do a little bit of crowdsourcing, and I'm going to ask you to tell me some of the myths that you've heard about renewable energy, or some of the arguments that you've heard from opponents of renewable energy, ones that come up particularly often, ones that might really strongly annoy you, ones that you might be particularly keen to hear an answer to. I got this a bit tactically wrong when we did this session last year, because I crowdsourced loads and loads of arguments. I had a list of about 12 of them up there, and then we only had time to go through 2 or 3 of them. So we ended up with loads more negatives than we did positives. So I don't want to do that this year. What I want to do is I just want to focus on 2 or 3 of common myths or bits of misinformation, things that commonly say about renewable energy that you would like some help in being able to rebut or respond to. So, could you raise your hand if you've got one to contribute?
The main problems are that they add to fuel costs, so that people have increased fuel poverty, and they kill bats, they don't work, there is no actual reduction in the requirement for fossil fuels, and they are just a full subsidy on landowners.
So I've noted down 2 of those. Renewables don't work, and they're just adding to our bills. Perhaps if one other person would like to contribute one more, and they'll probably have enough to be going on with. One more from anybody?
It's about farming subsidies.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Would anybody like to contribute an answer to number one, that they don't work? Any takers? Please raise your hand if you'd like to contribute. If not, I'll try to do it myself. Actually, one of the best responses to that is something I'm going to show you right at the end, hopefully with the help of the visual link people. Because I was really all over to see a pie chart that was published last week of where our electricity came from in the last quarter, between November 2013 and January this year. And I've never seen one like it before. It's for a whole quarter, not just like one day. So it was 16% of our electricity was coming from renewables during that quarter. It's never been that high. The profile of electricity generated in the UK has never looked like that before. It's quite a revolutionary change in anything we've seen before. Hopefully we'll have the diagram up there to show you, but that was 16% of our electricity during the last quarter came from clean renewable sources. Of that, actually I think it's more than 16%, I'm getting the percents and the terawatt hours mixed up. I think it was 18%. But of that 16 terawatt hours, the biggest single contributor was onshore wind. It was about 6 from onshore wind, about 4 from offshore wind. Offshore wind is growing very, very rapidly, but onshore is still the biggest single contributor to renewable electricity in the UK, and at a scale dramatically higher than we've ever seen before. So I think that actually deals quite well with the argument that they don't work. Anything else around the fact that they don't work? Just checking the time.
I find that the questions are more like looking at a specific energy. So someone might say, oh, wind turbines, they don't pay off their kind of the cost that it costs to build them in the first place. So quite a specific question.
Yeah, it's true. You do have to be versed in some quite specific arguments around this, and it can be very dispiriting because you deal with one and then things go and make another one. There was a publication, I'm just rushing around, I've forgotten exactly where I put it down, but I'll show it you before the end of the session. It's called Common Concerns About Wind Power. It's published by the Centre for Sustainable Energy based in Bristol. It's a really valuable primer. It's a couple of years old now, but it really does deal in great depth with about 11 or 12 of these things that are commonly said about wind power in particular. And on the issue of the payback time that you just mentioned, well, I'm not sure about how it works financially, but in terms of energy, the amount of energy that it takes to construct a wind turbine, it's paid back within about 6 months of operation of that turbine. So it's you hear it said, repeated, and it's said many times, that it takes more energy to construct a wind turbine than you ever get out of it. That may have been true for one particularly badly sited micro turbine put on somebody's chimney in the top of a valley, in the bottom of a valley, or something like that. But actually, for most commercial scale wind turbines and farm scale wind turbines, the payback time is very good. And so they generate 20-30 times the amount of energy involved, 20-30 years worth of energy, and they pay that back in 6 months. Anything else you'd like me to do about don't work or contribute about they don't work? Back there,
Sorry, I can't quite read this, but in Mid-Devon, where I come from, the biggest issue, and I think this is one we've really got to tackle because this is why David Cameron and most Conservative MPs are against wind turbines, is what they see as the way it despoils the environment. Actually, an aesthetic argument is the biggest one, and it's not exactly a myth, it's just a different view of the world. But we've really got to deal with that because at the moment, wind turbines, you can say goodbye for the moment.
Yes, thanks very much for that, and I'll add it to the list. It's I must not move too close to that speaker. Yeah, I think it's absolutely right to raise that, and it's one that I would put in a different category from most of the others that you might hear or deal with, because as you so rightly say, it's not a myth, it's a perception, and it depends on the individual. And that's a thing that we can't really deal with. But probably that perception and the way that people respond emotionally to seeing something as undeniable and prominent in the landscape as a wind turbine will be conditioned a lot by some of these other arguments and sort of political positions that people are taking and things that they believe about what that wind turbine represents. So it's not completely divorced from the factual arguments around it. But the initial response is an emotional one. So I think some of the things that some of the other people have been dealing with in this session today in this space and will be doing around the artistic response, around storytelling, is perhaps just as valid a way of dealing with that particular issue as anything else we might say. I do think, though, that we should point out that the process for planning renewable energy installations at scale, be they solar farms or wind turbines, even quite small wind turbines, actually involves an enormous amount of work on the part of the developer to be able to analyse and attempt to show what its landscape impact will be, and to actually be able to convince a planning committee or a planning inspector that that impact is acceptable. So it's not like they have carte blanche to build whatever they like, wherever they like. They do actually have to do some kind of work in order to demonstrate that the impact is acceptable. It's a very difficult thing to do, though. Would we like to deal with the issue around subsidies? Is that a good one to try and take next? Yeah. Would anybody like to contribute a thought on that, on subsidies? What you think the reality is, as opposed to the things that are commonly said?
Isn't there a huge, actually it's skewed the other way really. The subsidies are for nuclear and coal are much more than on the renewables.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I can just expand on that in a moment. Anything else people like to contribute about dealing with this argument around subsidies? I think your point in the front here is absolutely a really important one to make, that there's a great deal of focus on the subsidies that are paid to renewables and a tendency to forget other subsidies that are paid. So just in the last week there was some newspaper headlines, I think in the Mail, around the fact that wind turbine operators, because they didn't have access to the grid, they couldn't sell the electricity they were generating. They were being paid, and there was a total, I forget what time period it was, probably over the last quarter or something, £20 million has been paid to operate some large-scale wind farms because they've not been able to sell their electricity. In the same period, £200 million, 10 times as much, was paid to the operators of gas-fired power stations for exactly the same reason. But that didn't fuel the generators. So there's a tendency to concentrate on relatively small payments that are made to assist the renewables industry and forget the whole plethora of subsidies, tax breaks that are given to the fossil fuel industries. I mean, the Chancellor is very keen on subsidising or giving tax breaks to the fossil fuel industry. Or indeed the enormous amounts of money that we are having to spend, something like £76 billion now set aside just to decommission some the nuclear waste, to deal with the nuclear waste that nuclear power stations in this country have already generated. So I think a good way of combating that argument around subsidies is to point out that what goes to renewables is relatively small, but it's also, I think, a question of acknowledging that subsidies have a purpose. And they are there to assist an industry that should grow and mature. And it finds it difficult to compete in the open market economically, but given assistance over time, costs come down and it does become competitive. And this has happened with wind, it's happened with solar. There is every possibility that before the time this decade is out, before 2020, both onshore wind and solar will be generating electricity that is cheaper than you can get from gas. So it will actually probably be the cheapest form of electricity that we can do from these land-based solar and wind installations. And that means that the subsidies will have achieved their purpose. They'll have helped transform our energy economy, they'll move us onto cleaner sources, they'll have moved onto sources that we can rely on more without having to depend on imports of gas. So let's not be defensive about subsidies. Let's acknowledge that they're there for a purpose and that purpose is being achieved. And it's helping to establish a viable and important new industry. I'm just going to click on the time here. So we've got about 5 minutes left. And I guess that the issue about adding to fuel costs is what was left. Unless anybody else would like to contribute another thought, either an issue you'd like to tackle or a way of repeating it.
Sorry about this, because I came a bit later, but often, not so much wind, but the idea that renewables are not available when you need them, and the problem of storage. I don't know whether that's been covered already.
Yeah. No, I haven't covered it. So that's just to repeat that. That's the issue about intermittency, to use a word of far too many syllables, which I could probably say much shorter than that. So by their nature, renewable sources don't operate all the time, and they operate in a way that is not really variable, but sometimes hard to predict very far in advance. Is this a problem for the electricity grid? Is it a problem for keeping the lights on? Anybody like to contribute a response on that? I'm quite happy to, but I just like hear from other people if anybody else wants to. I'll go for it. So I think one of the, again, demonstration through the facts of what is actually happening in places in the world does help. So just like we can dispense with the argument that renewables don't work by showing how much we actually have contributed. The intermittency argument, well, you go to a country like Denmark, they've got 25% of their electricity now coming from wind, and they're well able to cope with keeping the lights on. Lights don't go up in Denmark because their grid is able to cope with it. And as indeed is our grid. And you may have heard the story about what happens when there's something like a World Cup match when the England team are playing, and you get the electricity demand going like this throughout, and we're sat watching the match, and then it comes to half time or the end of the match, and everybody thinks time for a cup of tea. So all over the country, millions of people go off and they switch on their kettles, and the electricity won't go off like that. Or you can get occasions when, because you're doing this, there's a storm and a pylon blows down, and this happened to a nuclear power station in Scotland. Suddenly, 800 megawatts goes off the system. An 800 megawatt power station was generating and feeding into the grid one moment, and the next moment it's not. So these huge swings and spikes in demand and supply are things that our grid has to cope with. It's engineered, built and run to cope with those big swings in relatively short periods of time. So actually being able to absorb 10-20% of renewables onto the grid system doesn't cause much of a problem. So we're already running 18% over the last quarter. As you get higher than that, then you do have to introduce new technical solutions, and the cost does increase somewhat as a result. You have to do things like keeping gas-fired power stations not running full tilt. You have pump storage capacity, you have interlinks, so we can improve electricity from across the channel. There are many, many technical ways, and increasingly more sophisticated. As we get smart grids, we'll be able to match the demand to the supply at a much more local level, much more effectively, and deal with these ups and downs. And just a final point on the intermittency, actually the forecasting is getting increasingly reliable. speak to the guys at the Met Office just down the road, and they run a sophisticated package of information for the renewable energy industry and for the grid, and they're able to forecast with a high degree of accuracy just how much we'll be getting from wind dispersed around the country over the next 24 hours. That, of course, is a good reason why you need a mixture of resources. You need wind and solar in lots of different locations, so you're not at the mercy of the weather doing something funny in one place and looking at a whole lot of your generating capacity. I've got a couple of minutes left, so I just want to I really encourage you to get involved with myth busting. As I said at the beginning, perhaps not as when he was here, it's important we don't just leave the whole territory open to the sceptics and leave all the argument in the media open to people who don't like renewable energy and don't want climate change to happen. So I encourage you to get involved and do what you can through columns in the newspaper, letters to councillors, letters to MP, to rebut some of these myths. And here are some of the sources that I've used that I find really helpful. So that's our kind of, if you like, our armoury, our myth-busting allies. I put Renewable UK first. It's a very good source of information. When I was looking for, I wanted some figures about how many people support renewable energy. It actually hasn't changed very much over the last 2-3 years. It's been running pretty consistently. You might find it hard to believe if you read the Daily Mail, but actually the majority of people in this country do support or strongly support renewable energy. It runs at about 70%. It hasn't changed. I found that statistic, I found it on Renewable UK's website in about 2 minutes yesterday afternoon, and I just went on there and looked through their press releases. It sent me to a DEC website.
Sorry, I was just going to define, if you can define what was the question, because I mean, support, it could be, are you not against it or something like that?
Yeah. It was broken down, so strongly support, don't have feelings either way, oppose and strongly oppose. There are 5 levels. And it's about 70% either support or strongly support. Yeah. That referred me on to the Department of Energy and Climate Change website where this survey was published. It's a survey that they repeat every 3 months. I wouldn't quote Renewable UK as the source because they are the industry body. And so although I find them factually perfectly reliable, people might say, well, they would say that when they're the industry body. Our lovely hosts, Regen Southwest, really valuable source of information. They're particularly good at compiling the data on how many renewable installations there are in the southwest of England, what they contribute, how many jobs they contribute. Centre for Sustainable Energy, I mentioned, they have their publication, The Common Concerns About Wind Power, really valuable, and again, lots of kind of regular updates. Carbon Brief is a source that I rely on a lot, and I find them really good. You can get daily email updates from them, or you can subscribe to a weekly digest. They do stuff around myths around renewable energy. Their particular strength is they're very good on the science and the politics of climate change. So they analyse not only what the scientists are saying, but what the media are saying about what the scientists are saying about climate change. And then the organisation that I work for, Friends of the Earth, we've got publications in support of wind power and solar power. And we have a network, and again, I can't remember, I've got my piece of paper, but before we go, I'll try and find those and pass them around for you. We have something called the Low Carbon Network, and if you're working in the industry or want to support the renewable energy industry at the small and local scale, I really would encourage you to sign up to our Low Carbon Network. And what we want to do is to build up a list of people. We won't be deluging you with emails and stuff every day, but just every now and then, in a targeted sort of way, every 2-3 weeks or once a month or something, we'll contact you and suggest a particular action that we might like you to take or would be useful for you to take, emailing an MP or something like that in response to some particular issue that's come up around renewable energy and around the low carbon economy. So having that sort of widespread network of people, thousands of people who will take action, small action to help is really useful for us. So, I've reached the end of my tether, the end of my time. The wonderful pie chart I told you about is appearing on the wall at the back now, so you can now see yourself for the first time really that pie chart is beginning to look like it's broken into 4 segments and not 3. I've grown up with seeing the other segment, just about as big as renewables, but now renewables is coming into its own, challenging nuclear for 3rd place, and may it do more still in future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
It's like